All right, I want to keep my opening comments incredibly brief because we have a wonderful panel and an incredibly important and timely topic. I want to start though really briefly by really thanking the student organizers along with all of our panelists for being here part of this important conversation. And really also to situate why it is so important and valuable that the law and political economy student organizations are the ones who are supporting this overall conversation today and part of the broader movement. So for those outside of legal academia, who are hopefully a good amount of the people who are currently I will see it every year. So those who are outside of the law and political economy, I should know this. I drove all the people crazy during teaching during Zooms. I can't stand still. Know that actually one of the most valuable contributions that the LPA movement has made economic policy making is not just the specific ideas put forth by those that are going to be speaking today and others who help to do things like reinvigorate the conversation around competition policy, but to really change the paradigm over who it is that ought to be engaging in those conversations and what it ought to look like. For far too long, economic policy, generally speaking, had really been delegated to the domain of technocrats with the idea that there were going to be expert answers to difficult questions over how best to structure the economy and the types of solutions that ought to be on the table. And the biggest contribution of the LPA movement has been not to dismiss expertise, everybody's going to be speaking today, is expert on the topic that we're going to be covering, but instead to really broaden the field of the type of experts that we need, understanding that these are not matters of just technocratic expertise, but instead there's going to be incredible range of ramifications and simultaneously opening the door for experienced and lived experience to play a meaningful role shaping these debates. So suddenly economic policy making is not going to be something that is done where we are delegating or handing off to experts, but instead is part and parcel of the democratic enterprise and trying to figure out what's at stake, what are the various values that we care about, and quite importantly, as today's conversation reflects, how can we be creative about thinking about the options before us? And let's look a little more critically at a lot of what we viewed as constraints as potentially self-imposed constraints, as opposed to constraints that actually need to be binding. And it's against that backdrop that we are going to have a really exciting conversation today. And it's a conversation not only about whether we ought to mint the $1 trillion coin, but about the debt ceiling. Like why this thing actually even exists. What are the functions it's playing? What are the functions potentially not playing? In some ways, it's an incredibly depressing conversation about everything that some people view as broken about how politics is currently happening. I would actually view it as an incredibly hopeful conversation because we're having this conversation. Because the Treasury Secretary actually feels obliged to weigh in, and major publications are weighing in on whether or not this is the right path forward. And the question for me is not just, is this the right path forward, but is this a conversation we need to be having? And part of what we're seeing is this is now a conversation that we're having. So with that, I'm really excited to turn it over to four people who have been so critical to helping ensure that this is a conversation that we ought to be having. In the order that they will be speaking, we're going to start off going to the West Coast, where we have Phil Steele, President of the U.S. Monetary Reserve, and previously 35th Director of the U.S. Mint, Chief of Staff to the U.S. Treasury Department, and Majority Staff Director for the Senate Finance Committee. In addition to all this policy making, he also brings a business perspective to this conversation. Stephanie Kelton joining us right here, Professor of Public Policy at Stony Brook University, formerly Chief Economist for the U.S. Budget Committee, Senior Economic Advisor for the Sanders campaigns in 2016 and 2020, and overall incredibly influential in expanding the policy window when it comes to thinking about what we want to achieve through monetary policy, but more importantly, also through how we have to be thinking about the deficit. Joe Weisenthal, Executive Editor for Bloomberg Digital, co-host of OBLEP, and again, just somebody who's been incredibly terrific in trying to figure out how to broaden the engagement around these issues. And of course, our moderator and one of our key organizers, Rohan Gray, professor at Willamette University and head of the Modern Monetary Network. So it's an incredibly wonderful lineup. And hopefully hold on to your questions because we also want to try to structure it in a way that facilitates really robust conversation. So with that, I will turn it over to Philip.